The New Zealand Howard League's history began in England in the 18th century with prison reformer and philanthropist John Howard. Howard was born into a wealthy family in 1726, and at the age of 48, he was appointed High Sheriff of Bedfordshire. His duties included inspecting the county prison, and he was appalled at the conditions he found. Filthy, vermin-infested quarters with many prisoners housed together in one room without access to drinking water. Over the next 3 years, he visited hundreds of prisons throughout Great Britain and Europe. John Howard campaigned for humane conditions in prisons until his death in 1790. Throughout the 19th century, benevolent organisations in Britain continued to advocate for the plight of prisoners and to promote the humane treatment of those in captivity. In 1866, the Howard Association was one such organisation, which took its name in honour of John Howard's legacy. In 1921, they merged with a similar group to form the Howard League for Penal Reform. The establishment of the Howard League was announced in the Times of London, which would eventually be read half a world away by a New Zealander named Blanche Bourne. Born into a middle-class family in England in 1870, Blanche Edith Bourne had a tumultuous childhood. Her father died when she was 10 years old, and her mother, who had a family history of mental illness, was in and out of institutions for most of Blanche's early life. Bourne moved to New Zealand in 1900, working as a journalist for the Christchurch Star and as one of the country's first Pākehā poets. Fellow writer Berta Burns met her in 1919. This is how she describes her. There, petite and poised and punctual as ever, she stood. About 5 feet 2 inches in height, with keen brown eyes, a very straight back, and a resolute and searching presence. She wore a coarse brown tweed costume, a man's Panama hat sitting jauntily on her short grey hair, brown brogues with fringed tongues, and a marketing bag of uncertain vintage over her arm. Bourne became interested in the prison system after taking in a runaway from a residential home for girls. She began visiting and writing to prisoners around the country, and like John Howard, she found a prison system that was dehumanizing and did little to address the underlying causes of crime. Blanche Bourne, along with like-minded individuals such as Berta Burns, formed the New Zealand Howard League in 1924, the first Howard League to be founded outside of Britain. They campaigned against capital punishment and the flogging of prisoners. They also pushed for psychiatric treatment in prisons and for the introduction of a probation system, which did not exist at that time. Blanche was a staunch advocate for prisoners and prison reform, undaunted by the opposition she faced. But although Bourne and the Howard League were initially regarded as troublemakers, in time they were celebrated for their work. And in 1935, she was awarded the Royal Jubilee Medal for her contributions to New Zealand society. The 1950s and 60s saw a period of significant reform in the prison system in New Zealand. Capital punishment was abolished and PARS was established. From the 1970s through to the late 90s, interest in penal reform waned in New Zealand, and many of the branches of the Howard League closed. Sir Peter Williams ran the League in Auckland for many years, and in 2011 he handed over the reins to retired businessman Tony Gibbs, who soon brought on Dame Kath Tizard and former Labour Party President Mike Williams. They relaunched the League as a national organisation with the goal of reducing New Zealand's incarceration rate, which in 2011 was among the highest in the OECD. They identified New Zealand's high rate of reoffending as a significant factor, with 52% of released prisoners being re-imprisoned within 5 years. Their strategy to address this shameful situation was to focus on offering programs to prisoners to help them gain skills and employment. The first of these to be developed was a volunteer-based literacy initiative. The program held its first graduation in 2013, celebrating the success of learners at Hawke's Bay Regional Prison. In the years that followed, The League built up a large team of volunteers, offering a range of programs in prisons across the country, from ESOL and numeracy to beekeeping. In 2014, the Department of Corrections proposed an initiative to get driver's licenses for those on community sentence. This idea was brought to the New Zealand Howard League, and a pilot program was funded in the Hawke's Bay. The pilot was operated by the League's first prison volunteer, Anne Brown. It was a massive success, with 77 clients attaining a license in the first year. To see whether the success could be replicated, Corrections funded an urban program in West Auckland with instructor Jenny Mickey. Next, a program in Whangarei was funded by the Lighthouse Foundation, bringing on board instructor Amy Clark, who had been running a driver licensing program for the Salvation Army. Amy was given a target of 100 licenses in her first year, but met this within just 6 months. The program is now funded by the Department of Corrections and employs 24 instructors from Kaitaia to Dunedin, and has now achieved more than 27,000 licenses.